Welcome to the Nerd Journey Podcast. Our goal is to help you, the technology professional, accelerate your career progression, increase your job satisfaction, and be more effective in your existing role.
We want to bring listeners like you the career advice we wish we'd been given earlier in our careers.
I'm John White, at VJourneyman on Twitter, sharing co-host duties with Nick Cordy at NetworkNerd_.
We're two former IT operations guys who have moved on to pre-sales roles with technology vendors. We have our opinions, but we also like to highlight the journeys of others and see what we can learn from them.
We'd also like to ask for your feedback to make this a conversation, not a one-way broadcast. Email us at nerdjourneypodcast@gmail.com or DM us at nerdjourney on Twitter. So come join us on our nerd journey.
Let's take a trip. Episode 323. If you thought of your career as a hardware or software product, what would the release notes say for the current version? Products are usually brought to market with a minimum set of features we call the minimum viable product, or MVP. And then over time, based on customer feedback, you'll find that features and enhancements are made to make it even better. Our guest this week is Daniel Lemire. He's an AI consultant at ServiceNow, but he's also someone who started working on a minimum viable product for his career as early as high school, even though he may not have realized it at the time. This week in part one of our discussion with Daniel, you're going to hear about his early plans to be a pilot in the Air Force and how that had to change, and he eventually landed on pursuing management information systems. We'll talk about Daniel's decision to become an independent consultant after college, how he gained experience as a system builder, and then his decision to go ahead and pursue an advanced degree. I'll give you a hint. All of these decisions were based on feedback and an openness to accept that feedback. What exactly do I mean by that? Catch the full story as we share part one of our discussion with Daniel Lemire.
Daniel Lemire, welcome to the Nerd Journey Podcast.
Boy, it's so great to be here. Really enjoying having the opportunity to speak with you guys.
Yeah, thanks. Can you tell us a little bit about what it is that you do right now?
Currently, I have a role at ServiceNow that is classified as an AI consultant. Basically, I get to talk with senior leaders about the use of artificial intelligence in their organization specific to the ServiceNow platform. And as you might imagine, that's a pretty popular topic of conversation these days.
I hadn't heard.
I really do enjoy it. It's been a great opportunity for me to really drive that influence and help organizations create value. One of the things that I've really picked up over my career is calibrating the use of technology against the creation of value. You know, in the early days, you get excited about code and making computers do fun things. And now we've really turned the corner all the way around to, okay, where do we create the value? And then how do we leverage technology to do that well?
Before we get too far into that, can you tell us a little bit about your origin story? How do you think you got into technology in the first place?
Couple of interesting details there I can share with you briefly. When I was in middle school, I really got into computers. We actually had a computer lab and we even had a computer club. And so there was a few of us, maybe 6 or 8 of us, that were really into working with computers. I had the benefit of being very young and having a computer at home, and that wasn't everybody in those days. That was early 90s. So I benefited from having that computer at home, and that led to enjoying playing games and talking about it with friends. But my interest going into high school actually was I really wanted to be a pilot. So I had aspirations to join the Air Force, go to the Air Force Academy to be an officer, to, really get ahead of that game. And I spent a lot of time and energy to figure out, okay, how can I make this happen and do it well? And I got all the way to my sophomore year of high school, and I got a phone call from an Air Force recruiter. And of course, I was really excited to get a call from a recruiter because I'm like, oh yeah, man, I'm going to join the team. And so we're just having conversation, and I was talking about some of the things that I was doing to put myself in a good position, because he was asking me questions about that, being curious.
Mm-hmm.
And at some point during the conversation, I said, yeah, I haven't had any trouble with my asthma. Things are going well. I'm all over the athletic thing. And he says, "Oh, I'm sorry to hear that." And I was like, "What do you mean you're sorry to hear that?" He says, "Well, if you've ever been diagnosed with asthma, you're disqualified from being in the Air Force." That was a startling moment for me because here I'd been working toward this dream, and this was the first I'd heard about the asthma thing. That was something that was lurking in the corner. I had no idea that was a challenge that I was going to have to contend with. So immediately I found myself in this position of, okay, well, if it's not the Air Force, what are my plans? Like, what are you going to do next? Am I just going to go find a school to become a pilot and continue down that path with a different means? Or am I going to do something completely different? And to be totally candid with you guys, honestly, I kind of threw up my hands and I said a prayer. I said, "God, this is what I wanted to do. And now it's not how I thought this was going to go. What should I do?" And over the next few weeks, the computer thing became increasingly an area of focus. And it was through conversations with friends and even a few teachers where they were like, "You're good at this computer thing. Maybe that's where you should be spending your time." And so kind of from that moment on, I was into finding ways to do things with a computer because it was something that I enjoyed. And anytime you can take something you enjoy and turn that into value is really great. So I took advantage of some of the opportunities that hit me immediately there following. We had some computer classes that were available in high school. So I took a computer maintenance course as a senior, and I learned all about the hardware bits. That was a real game changer for me because it opened up a door to things that I didn't know I needed. I was good at, using the office tools, and I'd even taken a computer programming course, and I really enjoyed that. I really loved the programming. And then I also took some of the other things that are not really fancy or fun, but that you really needed. So I had the benefit or the detriment, depending on your perspective, of taking a typing course from a typewriting teacher, and it was software. So you were taking it as a typist as if you were using a typewriter. Well, that was a problem for me because if you made 3 errors, you failed the typing exercise. And I was not good at not making mistakes. So that was one of those classes that did not help my GPA, but I wouldn't be typing at the incredible rate of speed that I type now had I not invested the time in those sort of fundamental things. So that progression put me in a good position coming out of high school to take a computing-related curriculum in college. And I kind of had 2 choices. One was the sort of management information systems or the computer science. So as I was exploring college options, inevitably I would go on a campus tour and I would go see the computer science people and I would go see the business computing information systems people. And what I learned after about 3 college tours was that because math wasn't the thing that I was most interested in, the business computing side of things is really where I belonged. One thing led to another, and I wound up going to a state school where the fees for college were affordable, and I wound up at the University of North Texas. One of the really cool things that came out of that was I got to learn not only the latest and greatest technology, but some of the older things. At that time in 1999, when I started in college, the University of North Texas was one of only 3 colleges in the entire country that let their students work on a mainframe. So I got to work on a mainframe before I even got into my official career. I learned all of the fundamental things that I needed to go out and become a computing aid and help to businesses.
I really like how you handled the immediate bursting of bubble related to the Air Force and becoming a pilot, because I don't feel like most people handle those kind of setbacks well or get over them quickly as they dive into something else. The alternative, spend more energy moving forward as opposed to just kind of being down in the dumps. So I'm guessing that plays into the later part of your story.
You're going to see that again later, though I can't say that I bat 1,000 in that category, Nick. One of the things I'll share with you is that sometimes your first answer is the right answer and you convince yourself out of doing the right thing. The good news there for me was that I was so early in making those kinds of big life decisions that I didn't have enough material to dissuade myself from taking the right action.
but you did have enough information to decide which line of study fit with what you were interested in, as well as your strengths in the best way. I like that too.
Yeah, there is an element of self-awareness, I think, that is something that we don't talk about enough. I'm very much a striver. I will do things that are very hard for myself just because I want to accomplish something really big. And there is absolutely a time for taking on those big things, but you also have to do it from the context of, okay, what am I good at and what can I get started with right here where I am? And I think that was definitely one of the things that played into that, because it was not only my interest in it that drove it, it was other people observing my interest in it that drove it. And talking to my friends and my teachers, they saw that I was interested in and good at the computers. And so I was able to be open to that immediately instead of searching around. And of course, in that high school environment, in those days, they kind of gave us a couple of different recommendations in terms, you want to choose something toward the arts, or you want to choose something toward science or math or engineering. And then the third option was some sort of a specialization in another area. I'm okay at math. It definitely not my strongest suit. I'm good at the concepts. Like physics was great for me because it's very conceptual. But as soon as they asked me to do a math problem, silly things would happen. Like 2 times 3 is 5. Like just nonsense, right? Just silly mistakes along the way. And so being able to capitalize on the part that I was good at in getting into that computing career, I think was the other piece of it, was knowing that I was good at it and being convinced in the shortest time possible that was the path for me by being open.
Did anyone tell you or guide you to go and look at both options? Or do you recall that just being something you naturally did to investigate the right decision?
I think I listened to the feedback I was getting from one of my primary teachers. Mm-hmm. It was actually the typing teacher. I took the typing class as a sophomore in high school, and just a really sweet teacher. One of the nicest teachers I've ever had. It didn't help my grade.
Right.
But, she recognized my aptitude because I would help her out. Like if she was having trouble with something and I could, give her a tip on how to do that a little better or improve the experience, I would do that in a polite way. And an opportunity came a little bit later on where I had some electives toward the end of my studies. And I actually worked for her as sort of a teacher's aide during one of those elective courses. And inevitably, the career conversation would come up and she would ask questions. And I was doing it to fill out my electives. I wasn't established on the computer course quite yet at that point. That was in that immediate time frame. And, looking back on it now that you're asking me about it, Nick, I got to tell you, I don't think having her as a teacher at the same time that I had that conversation with the Air Force recruiter was at all a coincidence. That was a God thing.
Very cool.
It's interesting to have that experience, I think, the way Nick was saying, like, so early on in such an absolute way. But then to be able to pivot and have the wisdom to explore multiple options instead of just grabbing on for dear life to like the first thing that occurs to you. And then also to have like a really applied vision for what that career path might be. Because I think a lot of people, around that time frame might have said, I'm really good with computers. And what they meant was I'm really good at playing computer games, like PC games, like not using the computers to do things, or even the way you said, like take a, computer repair course and understand the internals, or at least see them as a system, with parts that needed to be validated and work together and have a problem-solving loop of, something's wrong here and I might or might not have seen this before. That's a different thing.
I want to riff on that a little bit. While you were describing that, I was thinking back to how I got in that position to being open to the various things. And, I mentioned I had the computer opportunity at home, and that was a real game changer for me. Having access to the technology at such an early moment was critical. But to be honest, the games were actually a part of that. And not that I was good at the gaming. In fact, I wasn't good at it. And even more interesting, it led me to kind of destroy one of the computers that we had. Like, I totally broke the thing because inevitably you're trying to get something to run in the early days. I was trying to get Flight Simulator run and I didn't have enough. It was like a RAM memory thing. And I was doing some tweaks. That was back in the old DOS days. And I was tweaking the config.sys and the autoexec.bat. And I did something totally wrong. I don't even remember exactly what it was. But my mom had a friend at church that was doing computers for a very large insurance company. And he was the expert. And she called him up and he came over and he bailed me out, number one. Like, he fixed the problem. He knew what was wrong and took care of it. But that's where finding the right people to connect with really came into being, because he could have showed up and been like, Daniel, what an idiot. I can't believe you would do something like this. He could have fixed it and just walked away. But he took the time to sit me down and say, okay, I see what you did here. Now let me explain it to you so that you can understand it. And it was that taking of the time that really made a difference. And I haven't forgotten that, because we get so tied up in ourselves that we forget what it is to give that kind of a gift to somebody else. And that's an invaluable opportunity. And I learned so much through that and was able to convert that into a win time and again, because somebody invested those few minutes in me by explaining something I just didn't understand.
I think hopefully those of us in this line of work recognize the tinkering instinct, right? Maybe I'll poke around here and maybe I'll poke around here and experiment, because so often that actually benefits us. And the time that we get to a place that feels a little bit irreparable, like maybe not the right word, but I can't back out of this again. I think we've maybe lost a little bit of the fear of doing irreparable harm to the systems. And that's what allows us to learn more.
I think that played a big role for me as well, because where I was with computing to a significant degree was, I told people, look, I'm addicted to the undo button. Because with computers, you don't have quite so much measure twice, cut once. I mean, there are absolutely situations where that applies. And I think the further up in the career you get, the more likely it is that you'll get yourself in trouble by making a bad decision. But if you're able to identify those areas where you make mistakes less often, or you can set things up in a way that you can make those mistakes without them being harmful, I really think that is a key to success. And then the second part of what you said there that I want to trampoline on as we go through the rest of the career conversation is that opportunity for iteration. We don't give ourselves enough circumstances where you don't have to get it right the first time, where you can iterate and take advantage of an opportunity for growth in creating a new skill or learning a new system. Anytime you can set up a scenario where you don't have to get it right the first time, but you can benefit from it if you do, is so essential to the journey. Then you can really get ahead when things are going well, but avoid yourself getting into an unrecoverable situation from there on out. And I think that, going back to the early story of making that switch, that is the other thing that I now understand in a much better context now than I did in the situation. And to borrow from the agile methodologies, right? There's this idea of delaying a decision or not going through a door. It was Jeff Bezos. He said, I try very hard to make those decisions that I can go right back through the door if I find out it's the wrong way. And giving yourself that foresight to say, I don't need to know this is the right answer right now. I just need to know enough to make the next step. That's where I was in the early part of that career. And, that showed up again and again as I continued my education. And it really became critical when I got out of college. I went into college, turn of the millennia, and what I didn't know going into that program was that we were about to have an internet bubble burst. I was all excited about going to work for EDS because they were the big IT company that everybody wanted to go work for. And I was putting myself in a great position to go work for them. Fast forward a few years, I'd had a really great time at university, working on some great things, learning a lot of fantastic things about the technology and how to work with it. one of the most interesting courses I took was an internet computing course. And the curriculum for that course included building a business plan and building a team of individuals to make basically an internet-based company. We had a competition in the class that involved travel because we had a final exam proposal, mock proposal thing that happened, and it was actually sponsored by Sabre. In fact, the top 3 teams at UNT that were in the BCIS program went to Sabre to propose or demonstrate their business plan and show off what they had developed. We did the whole ball of wax. So it was both business and computing. My team placed second, so we did very well. And I learned 3 things from that experience. Really, really fascinating. One, it solidified the idea that you don't have to know everything to do something interesting or impactful. You just have to know enough to write the business plan and begin the conversation, to build the prototype so you can put something out there for someone to see. That was the first critical thing, and I got that from the course right away. The second thing I learned was in the presentation at Sabre, because our slot for presenting was at 11:55. We walked in the room, we started at 11:55, and I remember this because of what happens next. I get up to the podium, we pull up the presentation, I do the introduction, and the computer crashes because Norton Antivirus started up at noon to do the scan, and it totally took that PC out. I didn't have a presentation up on the projector for the entire remainder of our presentation time, but I had done the preparation to print out the speaker slides and notes so that I still knew what points to hit in the conversation. And that made all of the difference, because it really would have been a disaster had I not taken the step of printing out those pages that had the slides and the speaker notes on it. Because in those days, for me as a presenter, you wouldn't know it from what you see me doing today with, YouTube and doing major speaking. The very first time I got up to speak in front of a group, my hands were shaking. It took me many times speaking in front of a group to get over that. And so just getting up in front of those people at Sabre was a really big deal for me, because I still wasn't in that mode of, hey, I'm really great at this, it's no problem. I really had to build myself up, and what I observed through that process was, if I have some notes, I'm going to feel a lot better going into that room. And it really made all the difference. So don't underestimate that value of preparation going into something that is intimidating as well, because that gives you what you need from a confidence perspective. It's funny how your current experiences can crystallize that looking back on those moments. And I can absolutely tell you from a career perspective, what I didn't appreciate at the time was how much a difference that confidence made in my success. And I totally understand that now, because I had to go through the entire cycle of you're confident, you're not confident. How do I get that back to do and tackle the next big challenge?
The thing I find interesting about that is the willingness to attack something that you realize that you're not comfortable with. And a pattern that we've seen before, and I've, informally named it like smart kid syndrome, where you're good at something and people tell you you're good at it, and then you start to get invested in appearing to be good at things. So you don't invest in things that you know that you are not currently good at. The opposite of kind of a growth mentality. So it's interesting that even going through that, you had been prepared enough, or you had found the things that made you feel comfortable, and then you went back to it.
Well, in fact, not only did I go back to it, and this is another thing that I want to highlight from a pivot perspective, because it was only 3 or 4 months after that I came out with a degree, and entering the workforce found that there was no entering the workforce. There wasn't an opportunity for me to go work for somebody else because there was no openings. We were in a situation where a lot of folks were actually being laid off and finding different things. And so I had to fall back on what it was that I knew, that I was familiar with, in order to make myself successful. So I had a couple of things in my life going on that helped with that. One of them was I had proposed to my wife the summer before that last year of college, and we had plans to get married. We got married the summer after graduation, and she had been doing internships and found a great place to land in her career as a graphic designer. So we had at that point then planned family income, not get rich income, but no one's making any money. So we survived on her income for a bit of time. And I fell back on what I knew, which quite candidly was what I learned in that e-commerce course. You can build websites. You can help a business to build a presence on the internet and do things in the early days before really anyone fully understood what that opportunity meant. I knew that was something that I could do. And so I started building. I built my own website and I started that journey as an independent consultant, not because I wanted to be an independent consultant, but this is the thing that I know how to do. And it's a place that I can create value without having a job working for somebody else. I kept looking for that opportunity to work for somebody else, but it never materialized. And I made the best of the situation I was in. I have a marketable skill. I just have to find somebody that wants to pay me to build a website. And I found little jobs here and there, and I got better at doing that kind of consulting thing. And I knew that was an opportunity for me because as I was ending my college career, I had an opportunity the last summer of college. I was going back home to stay with mom and dad over the summer. My dad was running an indigent care clinic, the Conroe Medical Education Foundation, and they had a situation with their systems manager. He was the person that was responsible for all of the computers in the clinic. They made a really cutting edge decision. This was 2002. They had adopted an electronic medical record system, and this was kind of an unheard of thing in those early days, but they had such a significant patient load that they needed the computers to manage all of the patient records. I wasn't there, so I couldn't tell you the entire politics of the situation, but one thing led to another, and the gentleman that was in charge of that role actually walked out. He quit. He just left. And of course, I was looking for a summer job, and Dad comes home, and he says to me, Daniel, our IT guy walked out on us. Would you be comfortable coming in to take a look at what we have? Maybe you can just keep an eye on things until we hire a person to do this job full time. And of course I said, well, thanks for the opportunity, number one. But I mean, if all I have to do there is keep the things on, we're going to be fine. I'm not sure that I could run, 100 PCs and servers in this complicated network environment. Because, he told me, what they did at his place of work, and I understood that. I didn't turn it down because I was like, well, I'm going to learn something from this. Even if I'm there for 5 days and they hire somebody, this is worth looking at. And it took them a lot longer to hire somebody than they had anticipated. I wound up spending nearly the entire summer there. And while I was there, we kept finding things that I could help out with. I could build a database for tracking the number of patients they were caring for. And I built a payroll management database where they could keep track of time off and holidays and sick and salary things. So I built a whole bunch of systems, actually. It was well more than just doing the networking and the PCs. And of course, there were things that I was out of my depth at, but you make those mistakes and you learn. And in an operational environment, having the wherewithal to just fight through and not give up on the problem and stay late until you get it working was really the key to this success in doing that. And I carried that into the consulting business because that had convinced me enough to know that I do know enough about this that I can do the things that need to be done. Now I just need to find the right people to do it for.
And when you were in that environment, Daniel, finding the problems that you could solve, were you finding the problems that you could solve and providing the solutions because you decided to go talk to people about what they were doing? Or was it more like, I'm just placed in this situation and I have this idea and I'm going to try it?
Definitely a combination of both of those things. I would see a process that they had that they were doing, and I saw the amount of labor they were putting into that process, like the patient records thing. I had a conversation within the first couple of weeks of working there with one of the head nurses, because she was the one that was doing the most with the computer. She wasn't just dealing with the patients or the intake and the outtake, but she was, running the details of each of the 3 independent clinics that were in the overall setup. And she was working on something, and she asked for my help with like a Word or an Excel thing. And of course, I know about those things. So I would show up and I'd say, oh yeah, you could make a formula for that. And, I'm just talking about the things that I know, trying to help her with the problems that she's having. that happened like 3 or 4 days consecutively, where we were just talking about this domain of problem space that she had, where she was trying to figure out how to keep up with the numbers and keep track of the data that was essential to her job in doing the reporting. And I knew enough from my college education, this was a repeatable thing. Like, she was doing the same thing every day, and she was reinventing the solution every day. And of course, that was big flashing lights to me. Okay, this is a system. I can really make a difference for this woman in her daily work if we could build a database that just takes the same information every day and formats it in a useful and convenient system. And I had built enough in the college course curriculum that was an easy problem for me to solve. Of course, I had to pull out the Microsoft Access book and, figure out how to do the indexes and all of those things that you have to do effective for a database. But I wasn't afraid of that because I'd done enough in the college courses to know that I could do it and that it was going to be a functional system that would add value. So that was part one. But the other part of it was, once I had done that for her, she was talking to other people in the office. So she became my promoter, because she would say, Daniel built me this great database system for keeping up with the patient counts. She was talking to the accounting person that was doing the payroll. So a few weeks later, I'm in the office with Jamie, the accountant, and she's like, we really need a system for keeping track of all of the nurses and their time off. And I understand you built a database for the patient records. Do you think you could build something for me? And I said, okay, well, what do you want it to look like? And this lady knew what she wanted. So it was a much more technical thing for me to take on. It wasn't just entering a couple of numbers. There was a lot more involved in the system, but she knew enough about how it should function that I could ask those questions around the logic and how it should activate and how it should tabulate and calculate the information she was looking for. So it was sort of a self-serving cycle. You do it once successfully, then people talk about it. And so what I didn't understand, and your question is really valuable here, because reflecting back on that journey, one of the things that I have a much better appreciation for in my late career is that idea of getting quick success on something that's going to get you momentum in the right direction. So often we get caught up in doing something that is either too much of a challenge for us, or we're too set on how much value we're able to create that we won't do it unless somebody pays a high price for it, because I'm worth it.
Or unless it's perfect, right?
That's it.
Perfectionism is immediately what I thought of.
It's hard, because how do you do good work without thinking about how can I make this thing perfect? Like it seems like such a dichotomy on the outset. Like, I need to do a great job. It's got to be perfect. But the truth is, no one ever does anything perfect the first time. So the art of perfection isn't about how you get it right the first time. It's how you keep at it until it's good. And I understand that now in ways that I couldn't comprehend back then.
One of the things that I thought about when you mentioned your colleague in payroll was that you had what is closer to what we would call a product manager now. Somebody who's guiding the vision towards, well, at a minimum, it needs to be able to do this. And then here's the priority of enhancements. And then it matches so closely to what you closed with, which is that product management journey. The product management journey is to get something, a minimum viable product out. And that is something that I think has only been, codified fairly recently in software. We need to get this thing out, and then we can iterate on it to add the things that make it better and better and better and better, as opposed to building this giant thing all at once and then putting it out there and then getting feedback on it, which is, in retrospect, doesn't really make much sense. But, maybe programming power used to be a lot more expensive.
Yeah. While you were explaining that just now, a couple of thoughts jumped to mind. I was in the PC era, and of course, my wife is a graphic designer, so she was always a Mac user. I sort of ignored that because that was what she needed to use, but I didn't understand that space because it wasn't my expertise. I couldn't understand why you'd want to buy a much more expensive computer that didn't give you the flexibility to do the things you want to do, which for me was computer games.
It's a tough family dynamic with a Mac user and a non-Mac user, right?
the tables turn, believe it or not. I've always been a Windows guy until just recently. We can come back to that a little bit later. What's funny about that, when you get into it, there is so much lore in the background of the growth in computing. And you really can't think about the PC without thinking about Bill Gates and the work that he did. And one of the things that myself and my colleagues have talked about on numerous occasions is what Bill Gates did with the acquisition of DOS and the building out of the software applications that he was responsible for, Windows and Office in particular. He sort of earned a reputation in the early days for building software that wasn't particularly well engineered, but that it worked well enough to do the job. You know, you poke fun at somebody like Bill Gates for saying, it was messy code, it wasn't the great. But looking back on that, that's a big part of, I think, the reason why he and Microsoft were so successful. It was that willingness to put the product out there, even knowing that it wasn't perfect, so that they could create value. And I'll keep coming back to that in the discussion again and again, because I want to call out to all of my friends in technology not to underestimate how important that value proposition is for everything that you do. We get so caught up in the technical that we don't think about that. And that's why that role, I think, has become so essential, because in many ways, that individual is calibrating between it needs to be technically great and we need to get something done. And so it provides the balance that I need as a developer, but also counterbalances the demands of a business end user, because, well, I mean, let's just be honest. We know what we want sometimes, and we're just frustrated if we can't get it. And you need somebody that can sit between those two positions and sort of negotiate between multiple different parties. But I do think you're absolutely right. And that role, I think, is becoming more important, not less, especially as we talk about the nascent technology things, because we all have things to do. We all want to do a great job, but there are practical realities to how much we can do in any given time. And that's what they master, is that balance between being the best and getting something done.
It's like a role that is the personification of the inner struggle with perfectionism.
Oh, I like that. Yeah. And the struggle is real, right?
Oh, yeah.
You know, the other thing that I've experienced personally is where oftentimes that product manager is the tiebreaker. When you have gridlock between the two sides, they help to get you out of that gridlock. So instead of fighting about it, you're just taking action. I think that's the key. Whatever it is, be taking action.
Take a step in a direction, even if you have to reverse it later, but don't stand still. Yeah. Well, you kept taking steps in different directions in your role, just helping out, and it turned into new projects and building of new expertise.
Let's keep going on that journey, because I want to get to the next major thing that happened. There was a couple of key things. One, I was getting some success in doing the consulting. So I was making money. I was developing my own capital. I built a whole very complex, and I'm still proud of it to this day, content management system. Before WordPress was even a thing, I had something that basically allowed you to manage the content on a website, which then expanded into being able to track customers and contacts. So, you know, before we had Salesforce. And I will even candidly tell people, in many ways, I'm a contemporary of the team that founded ServiceNow, because they built an internet platform that was a combination of database and process. The thing is, the ServiceNow folks were a lot better at product market fit than I ever was. So sometimes it's not how technically talented you are, it is finding the right people to work with that makes the big difference. But I'm still very proud of the work that I did. And when I found a customer that would let me really geek out and build them a big system, we both won. I mean, nobody ever said to me that it was a terrible system, but that's what I really wanted to do. I just wanted to build great systems. I didn't want to be a sales guy. I didn't want to be a marketing guy. That was not something that I was prepared for or had a desire to do. And I also recognized that I just wasn't any good at it. Sometimes you have to cut your losses and go with those things that excite you. And that's what I'd learned from the high school experience, right? I got into computers because that was something that was really interesting for me.
Yeah. But you found that sales and marketing were not. And as the owner of an independent consulting firm, those are necessary evils if you want to continue to survive.
And that was readily apparent to me because I would do those cycles of, okay, I got to promote myself. And then I'd get a gig, and I was so into writing the code and getting it done that I stopped doing the marketing and sales. And so inevitably I'd finish the job, and then I'd spend a month or two kind of twiddling my thumbs trying to figure, okay, I got to get somebody else that needs this work to get done. So during this phase of my career, I'm having conversations with other people trying to figure out, okay, what am I going to do? Because I was sort of a little bit in limbo. I wasn't finding great success at doing the consulting thing. And I knew I had the aptitude to really create value. I wasn't in the right place. And some early advice I got from, and I honestly couldn't tell you who I got this from. It was somebody that was much older and wiser than I was, probably somebody at one of the churches I was attending, because that's where I had the most exposure to people that were much older. If it wasn't at my own church, it was probably at my parents' church, inevitably a conversation at a church. And the advice I got was, what are you doing for yourself to grow while you're in this middle space? I thought about that a little bit, and I said, well, I'm thinking about maybe getting an advanced degree. I'd like to do that, but that's an expensive thing, and I really need to make some money so I can build a stable environment for my wife and myself to do well, right? Because, we were paying the bills, but only just. It really was. It was a splitting a box of macaroni and cheese for dinner kind of situation between the two of us. But the pointed advice I got from them was, if you're thinking about an advanced degree, your life is never going to be less busy because you're going to add all of these things that you want to do. You're going to have kids. You're going to have a career. You're going to be doing things with your family and your church and your community. If you feel like you have time to take something else on, you might want to think about just go get that advanced degree now while you have the time. And that got me thinking. So I started to look into that, and one thing led to another. And one of the things I found out was that UNT had an advanced degree program for a master's degree that let me double dip from my undergraduate coursework. And it cut a significant number of hours off of what was required. And I didn't know that. So as soon as that became apparent, it was like, okay, well, I wonder, if I can just take a 3-hour course at a time, I am making progress. I can probably I can bite off the cost of that or go get enough to get a loan together and keep taking the courses. Then I started the journey. I took the preliminary courses that I had to take. Then I took the GRE to make sure that I could get in and start the degree plan. And within about 3 years, I had finished the advanced degree. So I really put all of the pieces together, and that was a much better use of my time. And the other thing that it did for me was it gave me a much better appreciation of how businesses worked. The challenge was I didn't have the context of experience to put with it.
I'm afraid we'll have to cut it right there this week. There's an element of humility involved when we realize we can't solve a problem by ourselves. We don't have enough knowledge to make a decision. We don't know what to do. In Daniel's case, he said a prayer asking God for wisdom to make this decision on what he should do after his plan to go into the Air Force wasn't going to happen. And part of what he did was he trusted the feedback he was receiving from other people, and he was open to accepting their advice. So part of the humility, that humble attitude we need to have throughout our lives, is being open to accepting suggestions from other people. It doesn't necessarily mean we have to take them and act on it, but we should at least be open to it, absorb it, think about it. In Daniel's case, it made a lot of sense to go ahead and pursue computing, in his case, the business side of computing, as part of his college curriculum. When Daniel was talking about the idea of taking a step forward, even if you need to reverse it later, I love that idea to fight against perfectionism. And that's exactly what we talked about product managers doing, balancing the need for something to be very good compared to getting something accomplished and out the door and released. It's persistence without perfection. And I think that aligns really well with what we talked about in episode 320 with Kellen Gorman about accepting your work when it's good enough and calibrating your work based on time constraints. That's a great episode to go back and listen to. And then we also have some really good advice on perfectionism from our episodes 272 through 275. That was our book review of Finish by John Acuff with special guest host Jason Gass. A lot of great tips on fighting perfectionism there. One of the ones that stands out is using data to celebrate your progress. Let the data show you that you've made small steps forward. As Daniel said, you just need to take a step forward. And it doesn't have to be perfect. Maybe you're more of a perfectionist than you thought, but just remember, it's about small steps. Forward progress. Forward progress even if you need to reverse course. So what was it Daniel meant about lacking the context to apply the things he learned in the master's program? Stay tuned next week as we dive a little deeper on that topic. We'll see you then.
Farewell, listeners. Tune in next time as the journey continues. I'm John White at BJourneyman, for Nick Cordy at NetworkNerd_, signing off.
Adios.